Okay, welcome everybody to the 7th annual workshop on everyday virtual reality, WeVR 2021. And since the conference is now over, that makes us welcome everybody highlight to the 7th annual workshop on everyday virtual reality, WeVR 2021. And since the conference is now over, that makes getting some echo, but okay, let's go straight to it. We have some information about how the workshop is going to work, and yeah, I hope you can see my screen now. Okay, so welcome again. So just a few words here. This workshop has been organized by several people, myself included, Benjamin Vyers, Svetlana Bielkova, Misha Sra, sorry, an S is missing, Jan Guggenheimer, Augusto Esteves, Shizong Zhang, and Ji-Hei Han. So this year we had 10 accepted papers at the workshop out of 17 submissions. So again, it shows a strong interest in the themes of the workshop, and due to time constraints, we couldn't accept them all, so we had to make a selection. So how is it going to work? There are two sessions, so to speak. The first one is going to have papers about mixed reality themes, including augmented reality in everyday settings. And the second slot is about more VR-oriented works. So we are going to use the similar procedure to the one that was used at the VR paper session. So we are going to show the videos that the authors recorded for their presentation themselves. Then we will gather all the authors for a joint Q&A session all together, and then we will replicate that for the second session. Here's a list of papers in the first session on about everyday mixed reality. So we will start with these 5 papers, and the proceedings will be shortly uploaded to the website of the workshop. But I saw that on Discord Dariana has put a link to where the proceedings are right now, but we will also make a copy of the pre-prints on the workshop website, along with the videos and other data that you have shared with us. Also, yeah, if you haven't yet replied to the email that I sent a few days ago, if you're fine with us sharing the video, just say so, and we will put a link or upload the video itself on the website. And then the next session is also these other papers, but yeah, you will you a Zoom link on the Discord channel if you want to actively participate, for example, in the Q&A session. If you want to ask questions directly, then that's the easier way to do it without the Twitch delay and so on. If you also want to stay in contact with the WeVR community, there is an invite that perhaps I can share later in the chat here on the Discord. It doesn't get a lot of traffic, but it's a way for us to reach everybody that is interested in the workshop easily. So if you have space in your list of Slack channels, then maybe think about that. So the question for the speakers, we have created a document on Google, and the link is on the Discord, so just load it, and we've created several entries for each paper, and just type your question and your name in the document over there. And then after the papers have been all shown, we will start the Q&A session. Okay, and that was it for now. Unless my co-organizer want to add something, otherwise we can start with the videos. One moment. All right, so the first paper in the workshop will be presented by Nico Feld. in his co-author Benjamin Wires, and the title of the paper is Mixed Reality in Asymmetric Collaborative Environments, a research prototype for virtual city tours. Just a moment. Okay, share screen. Okay, you should see the video, and I will now play it.
Hello, my name is Uwe Feld from the University of Trier, and welcome to my talk about mixed reality in asymmetric collaborative environments, a research prototype for virtual city tours. Guided city tours are an essential part in tourism, and the guide's performance is crucial for a successful and satisfying tour. Technologies like AR and VR can assist the tour guide and improve his or her performance. Further, these technologies can help to create virtual city tour experience for various scenarios. Therefore, we think that using AR and VR in such a context can improve the overall experience. Further, a virtual guided city tour is a typical asymmetric collaborative virtual environment. In an asymmetric CVE, you have two user roles. The primary is the user with the main control over the virtual environment and contributes the most amount of information. The secondary mostly consumes these informations and is more passively. In a virtual guided city tour, the guide is in the role of the primary and the visitors are in the role of the secondaries. Further, a literature search showed that the primary in an asymmetric CVE usually does not use AR. Therefore, our main research question is if AR can support a primary in such an asymmetric CVE. In our work, we do not aim to answer this research question, rather we want to propose a prototype which allows further research. An asymmetric CVE which also used AR to assist the primary is the Dollhouse VR from Ibayashi et al. The work from Brown et al. Proposed a collaborative system for museums. A user either can visit a real museum with the PDA, visit a virtual representation via VR, or visit the museum via a website. We aim to be more immersive than the work from Ibayashi et al. And more intuitive than the work from Brown et al. In our prototype, a tour guide is using AR to perform a virtual city tour for multiple visitors. These visitors are immersed in the virtual city using virtual reality. To help the guide maintaining an overview over the virtual city, as well as interacting with each visitor on eye level, the environment of the guide is split in two different virtual working spaces. The desk zone is for maintaining an overview over all visitors and the virtual city. It is positioned around a real desk in the guide's real environment. On the desk zone, a small section of the virtual city with all visitors is displayed on an augmented wooden shovel. Further, an augmented map of the virtual city is attached next to the desk zone. On this map, the guide can see all visitors and the section of the virtual city that is displayed on the desk. With a sphere-based handle, the guide then can lead a visitor to a new location or change the section on the desk. When physically leaving the desk zone, the guide is automatically entering the warp zone. In the warp zone, the guide is immersed into the virtual city and can interact directly with the visitors. Further, the guide can interact with some objects in the virtual city via a radial menu. With this menu, a guide can either show a text or a video about this object or can highlight it. To create additional objects, the guide can use augmented documents or augmented wooden ships to create various new objects and show them to the visitors. Each user then can grab these objects and investigate them from all angles. Because of the current situation, we were not able to conduct a laboratory study to evaluate our prototype. Therefore, we first conducted an online survey about the prototype, and based on the results, we formulated 4 hypotheses. Then we invited few professional city tour guides to test our prototype hands-on in an expert interview. These results were then used to verify these hypotheses. The online survey was online for 49 days and had 31 participants. Based on the results of the online survey, we formulated 4 hypotheses. Hypothesis 1 is that the separation of working spaces and an intuitive transition can improve the workflow of the primary. Hypothesis 2 is that the usage of tangibles can support the primary in interacting with the system and the secondaries. Hypothesis 3 is that the combination of functionalities of real and virtual objects can improve the workflow, for example the augmented map. Hypothesis 4 is that the degree of realistic representation of the virtual city has an impact on the acceptance of the virtual city tour. To further verify these hypotheses, we invited 10 experienced city tour guides with the help of the Tourist Information TRIA. As part of the expert interview, the guides reenacted a virtual city tour with our prototype. The participants stated overall that the separation is useful and easy to use. Therefore, we want to further investigate the separation and transition. Overall, we assume to accept this hypothesis, but further evaluation is required. For the second hypothesis, about the usage of tangibles, we faced many technical issues, especially with the tracking. However, the participants stated that the usage was intuitive. Therefore, we also assume to accept this hypothesis as well. About the combination of the functionalities of real and virtual objects, the results indicate a rejection of the third hypothesis. Therefore, we reformulated this hypothesis. Also, the results indicate a rejection of the fourth hypothesis about a realistic representation. Therefore, we reformulated this hypothesis as well. The overall feedback of both the online survey and the expert interview were promising and positive. Therefore, we see potential in our system design. In conclusion, we are confident that our prototype is a promising starting point to allow further research on the research question. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, that was our first presentation of the workshop. Thank you, Nico, if you're listening. So, as explained, we will have a joint Q&A session after all the papers in this session have been shown. So keep writing your question in the document that we have shared, and we'll now continue with the next paper. Which is titled Exploring Bidirectional Pinpointing Techniques for Cross-Reality Collaboration. And the paper will be presented by Bianca Prakasan, and this is a collaboration with her, Pedro Belchio, Rafael Prates, Felipe Silveira, Daniel Lopez, Robe Coles, Augusto Esteves, and myself. Okay, I will now load the second paper. One moment, please. Okay.
Myself, Priyanka Prakasan. Mixed reality collaborative environment often needs cross-reality interaction techniques. In this study, we first explored unidirectional pinpointing techniques and then bidirectional pinpointing techniques for users in the external world and users who immerse in virtual reality. Multiple users collaborate across different immersion levels. Communication across realities becomes necessary. This is especially challenging between users that are immersed in VR and those who are outside VR. To understand what an immersed user is seeing or pointing, external users must rely either on screens that mirror VR user perspectives or follow explicit voice instructions. We implemented two systems where we explored how such an external user in the real world can interact across realities with a user immersed in virtual reality, either locally or remotely. We conducted two empirical studies to compare different yet well-known techniques to focus the attention of immersed user by the external user when performing selection or pinpointing tasks. The main objectives of our first system were how to focus the attention of immersed user by the external user when performing selection or pinpointing tasks. Then compare performance and qualitative measures of pinpointing techniques. In unidirectional cross-reality system, we compared a disruptive technique implemented as three-dimensional arrow that points towards the external user, selected object in the immersed user virtual reality, and a less overt highlighting technique to a baseline approach consisting of synthesized voice clips. We evaluated these techniques in a user study in which the immersed user had to define and pick the object in the shortest amount of time. Visualization modalities for immersed user and external user. Both the prototypes were modeled after a living room arranged with 50 different groups to get other users' position and orientation. We have represented avatars as spheres in both external and immersed user interfaces. External user uses quad keys to move around the entire virtual environment. In the voice technique, external user records an audio description of the object to be notified to the immersed user. A voice recognition algorithm converts it into a text message, which is then sent over the network. In the immersed user prototype, a text-to-speech algorithm then played the audio back to the immersed user. In the highlight technique, the external user highlights the chosen object in their 3D environment via the right mouse button click. Data about the chosen object is then sent to the immersed user application. In the immersed user prototype, the corresponding object highlighted in 3D arrow technique, the external user selects an object in their 3D environment. With the left mouse button pressed, the object information is sent over the network. A moving 3D arrow is instantiated in front of the immersed user's headset. The arrow will then move and rotate towards the corresponding object in the virtual environment. We conducted a within-subject user study to assess the performance and qualitative measures of two cross-reality interaction techniques such as highlight and arrow to the baseline method consisting of voice clips. We had three independent variables, voice, highlight, and arrow, all of which were counterbalanced by the Latin square, and we recruited 8 participants for a sample size of 24 trials. We had dependent variables such as task completion time, validated questionnaires for workload, user experience, simulator sickness, and non-validated questionnaires for user preferences. The experimenter explained participants the higher level goals of the task, consisting in evaluating different cross-reality techniques. Then they signed a consent form before participating. Each trial began when the external user initiated the search task using the interaction technique assigned to the trial. Through each cross-reality interaction technique, a particular book was chosen that the immersed user had to find. Once the book was found by the immersed user, they confirmed their selection by pointing at it with their controller and pressing the trigger button. After the conclusion of the experiment, the participant was asked to fill the previously indicated validated and non-validated questionnaires. Due to the non-normality of task completion data, we conducted a classical values analysis. Significant differences were found in terms of interaction techniques between voice and arrow, and between voice and highlight, but pairwise comparison between arrow and highlight were not significant. Based on ranking on user preferences questionnaires, we assume the preference goes to arrow followed by highlight. We conducted Friedman test on ranking data and found significant differences. Pairwise comparison using post-hoc analysis showed significant differences between voice and arrow. In the second system, we implemented a VR prototype and a touch application on Windows 10. Such that both users share the same virtual world but in a different points of view, where the interaction techniques are pointing in giant mode, vision cone, and highlighting. We conducted a user study to assess the perceived usefulness of the pinpointing techniques, vision cone, highlight, and pointing. We designed a within-subject study with 2 conditions, VR and tablet, and recruited 12 participants with 3 puzzle rooms, resulted in 36 trials. Our dependent variables measured using validated questionnaires such as workload, similarity sickness, system usability scale, and non-validated questionnaires for user preferences. Participants were instructed not to speak to one another and given no instructions other than trying to open the door they see in the virtual environment. The 6 puzzle rooms were completed in order. Data from first 3 puzzle rooms discarded as practice. After the activity in each puzzle room, participants were asked to complete a brief survey where they selected the most useful technique. How hard was it to complete the task, and how much felt the need to speak? The majority of the participants in VR referred to the pointing technique triggered by their tablet counterparts as the most useful technique, followed by the highlight technique. VR participants mentioned having no preference 13 times. On the other hand, tablet participants referred to the vision cone and highlighting technique as the most useful, followed by their own pointing technique. These participants mentioned having no preference 8 times. The least useful technique according to participants was the pointing technique in VR, mentioned only 5 times across VR and tablet participants. We have designed various cross-reality interaction techniques that support users at different levels of immersion in pinpointing the attention of the other user on a specific object of the virtual environment. Based on user study, we think that both disruptive and highlight technique should become representative of standardized interaction paradigms for multi-user cross-reality applications. In this work, we focus mainly on the modality through which user can focus the attention of users in another reality. Future studies may need to look at the feasibility of the more disruptive strategies in cases where users might be already engaged in other tasks or where multiple users are involved.
Okay, thank you, Priyanka, for the presentation. We will now move on to the third paper in this session, which will be presented by Deriana Thomas in collaboration with Lars Holmquist. And the title of the paper is Functionality All That Matters? Examining Everyday User Opinions of Augmented Reality Devices. Okay, just a moment.
Hello, I'm Dariana Thomas. Today I'm here to talk about our paper Is Functionality All That Matters? Examining Everyday User Opinions of Augmented Reality Devices. On social media, people have spoken about various concerns with AR that aren't commonly seen in current research, such as problems with hair and makeup, how a device looks, and discomfort and injuries that can result from using a device for AR. A review of AR usability studies found that user study participants are mainly young and educated males, which will not accurately reflect the general population's diverse concerns. There are well-established methods of evaluation for devices, however these don't go into detail about everyday experiences, so we felt a custom survey based on the noted concerns seen online better matched this research. Alongside questions around demographics and AR usage, 11 questions were created and each contained 2 parts. The first was a 5-step Likert scale to determine how much a problem was experienced, and the second was an open question for participants to detail this. These 11 questions were repeated for each device group that the participant had selected as having used. Participants who had not used AR before were instead shown a list of options to select why they had not used AR, as well as an open question for any other comments. 112 responses were used for analysis. These participants were nearly equally male and female and lived in various places worldwide. They ranged in age, and exactly half of the participants wore glasses. Out of the 112 participants, 39 used more than one kind of device for AR, and 22 had never used AR before. The most popular device group was smartphones and tablets, with other devices being the least popular. The following results have been summarized for this presentation, however, please feel free to find the paper afterwards for further detail. Similar views were expressed across device groups for discomfort. For those who wear glasses, 57% of smartphone and tablet users did not experience any issues. However, this decreased drastically in the other device groups. Some found that they couldn't wear their glasses while using a device for AR as they got in the way. Some participants felt pressure on contact points such as the nose and ears. For AR glasses in particular, one participant found that they couldn't adjust them to their head size. For general discomfort, about half of smartphone and tablet users mentioned problems, with more concerns in the other device groups. Fatigue and tiredness were common from holding or wearing the device for too long or due to the weight of the device. Environmental issues such as low light caused problems with loading the AR content. For headsets and other devices, various kinds of pain and strain were detailed. An AR glasses user noted that they had to move around quite a lot to see the content. The majority of participants across all devices did not experience any hair or makeup related problems while using AR. Of those that did, some of the smartphone, tablet, and headset users had makeup transferred to the device in use. Problems with facial hair and hair recognition were also noted, particularly with curly hair. One headset user had some discomfort from eyelashes touching the headset lenses, and those who had hair problems had difficulties with putting a headset and AR glasses on with certain hairstyles like ponytails. There were no concerns with makeup for AR glasses users. There were also no comments for hair and makeup from other device users. Nearly all participants had no injuries from using AR, however there was a larger range of movement limitations experienced. Of the smartphone and tablet users that did have issues, they either ran into things or they damaged their phones. Some users felt that they had limited use of their hands, where others said that battery requirements limited how far they could travel. Only minor injuries were experienced with headsets, such as hitting a wall. Some participants tripped over wires and had to look down explicitly to watch their step. One participant mentioned that they can't use their headset outside. 2 AR glasses users experienced problems with injuries, however they didn't comment on these. Only one of those with movement limitations commented, saying that they had to hold them sometimes in order to not let them fall. There were no comments from other device users in these areas. There were a number of opinions when thinking about the appearance of a device. Smartphone and tablet users said that size was important, as they liked that a smartphone fits in their pocket. Some were concerned that holding a device for AR use might attract attention and not be socially acceptable, while 3 noted that functionality matters more than appearance. Some participants felt that a headset attracted unwanted attention, or that they looked silly while wearing the device. 2 suggested that the headset appearance would depend on the purpose and surrounding environment, while other participants felt that the weight was important. For the appearance of AR glasses, some participants thought that they would need to look almost like normal glasses, while one participant was concerned with the weight of the device and how this affected long-term use. No comments were made on the appearance of the other devices. Most participants did not have any concerns with privacy or notifications disrupting their AR experience. For the smartphone and tablet users that did have privacy concerns, these were with how data was collected and stored, where some felt that sacrificing privacy seemed like the cost of entry. The participants that had notification problems found that they covered AR content and were distracting. When it came to headset privacy, 3 participants were concerned that it might be using the cameras to look at their surroundings. A few participants said that messaging and alerts interrupted the immersive experience, while some found the notifications received helpful. There were no expressed concerns for privacy with AR glasses, and there was one notification comment where the participant found the device's tutorial tips frustrating. Again, no comments were made in these areas about the other devices used. There were several opinions expressed when asked for further comments. The general opinion of smartphones and tablets was that they are an accessible and affordable way to experience AR, but that they're not very immersive. For headsets, there was a concern around hygiene when sharing the headset. Some felt the headset design should be improved for mainstream use, however others felt that the headset was fun and would recommend it to others. The AR glasses participants felt that a lot of improvements were needed. When speaking about a separate device, a participant was concerned about the device's fragility when moving around and not paying attention to their surroundings. Many of the 22 participants who had not used AR before selected multiple reasons, with the most common were that they felt they did not have access to AR and that they would like to experience AR in the future. Only 3 said that they don't want to experience AR, and 1 gave a further comment, saying that they find AR too clunky or too distracting, but that they'd be open to using AR if it becomes more streamlined and subtle in the future. Overall, participants' main concerns were around comfort, both in general and when wearing glasses, the appearance of the device, and movement limitations, although the concerns do vary with each device. There were not as many concerns with the other areas, though this is not to say that we should ignore these. Moving forward, we believe it would be valuable to construct a standardized questionnaire that considers these everyday occurrences that could then be used alongside existing measures during various AR user studies. On a final note, the range of opinions expressed in this survey demonstrates that a diverse set of users should be involved in future research, as they can provide unique everyday experiences that can improve the overall device designs. Thank you for watching this presentation. I look forward to answering any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Deliana, for the presentation. Looking forward to the Q&A session later on. We have a few more papers this morning. The next one will be presented by Yiran Zhang, and the paper is titled "In Touch with Everyday Objects, Teleportation Techniques in Virtual Environments Supporting Tangibility." And this will be a collaboration with Yiran Zhang, Nicolas Ladeveze, Huyen Nguyen, Cedric Fleury, and Patrick Bourdeau. Grab the video.
Hello everyone, I'm Ihan. I'm happy to be here today to present our tangibility-supported teleportation techniques. This work was accomplished by the Lycée Laboratory in France. Haptic technology can enhance the realism and immersion of user experience with a sense of touch. However, it is usually absent in home-based VR applications, and one of the reasons is that the haptic device on the market, such as the haptic arm and the wearable mechanical exoskeleton, are not always available at home or in small medium-sized company, and they are quite expensive for the general public. It is also possible to employ physical objects readily available at home as tangible objects to provide this missing feedback. For example, iTalk system deploys a suspended ball as a flying droid to physically interact with the user. The substitutional reality system pairs the living room's architecture features with a virtual courtyard. These real-world objects can serve as a tangibility medium to their virtual counterparts, contributing to a higher sense of presence and immersion. However, passive haptics usually requires a one-to-one mapping between real and the virtual object, which limits its use in many VR applications. For example, the use of the virtual navigation will introduce a spatial discrepancy. Moreover, the one-to-one mapping limits the reuse of the physical prop, as it can often only match one type of the virtual objects. Therefore, it is important to help the user to recover the spatial consistency during virtual navigation to support tangible interaction. In some previous studies, this problem can be overcome by reconfiguring the physical prop during its use. For example, Snake Charmer aligns a robotic arm with the virtual representation of the object. DarkTech employs a group of human workers to operate props to create a virtual world on the fly. However, using robots or employing a team of human actuators are usually difficult in everyday VR experience. Some redirected techniques can also solve the passive haptic inflexibility. For example, redirected touching and haptic retargeting generate different mappings between the real and the virtual space. Therefore, a single physical object can provide haptic feedback for various virtual objects. However, people also reported a strange sensation as the virtual space is warped, and the phase of adaptation is usually necessary to achieve adequate task performance. In the context of walking, redirected walking enables a single real prop to provide tangibility to multiple virtual objects by introducing an offset between the user's physical and virtual path. However, such a technique often requires a physical space larger than 6 meters times 60 meters, which is not suitable for domestic use. One can also deploy a self-overlapping architecture layout of the virtual environment to allow the user to reuse the same physical props in the adjacent room, as proposed in impossible space. However, the specific architecture layout also imposes limitations on the design of the virtual environment. Based on the limitations observed in previous studies, we proposed 3 interaction techniques to teleport either the user, the virtual object, or both of them to a new position to recover spatial consistency and enable tangible interaction. Our techniques are suitable for small tracking volumes, such as domestic rooms and offices, and do not depend on specific virtual environment layout. Also, a single physical object can be reused and linked with multiple virtual objects located in different places without introducing an offset. Our first technique computes the user's avatar future position to preserve the spatial relationship in the real world when a virtual object with potential tangibility is selected. The number of the resulted position is decided by the forms and the number of the physical objects integrated in the virtual environment. For example, if we pair a real chair with a virtual one, the user has only one possible teleportation position due to its shape. If we pair a suspended ball with a virtual flying droid, the possible position for the users tends to be infinite. And in substitutional reality system, the mapping is unique since every architectural feature should pair to its virtual object. Although the user can select an appropriate position amongst the multiple options computed by the system, it is sometimes unavoidable when the user has no choice but to teleport into a virtual object to maintain the spatial relationship. Targeted to these issues, the system will display a clone of the distant context around the users to simulate the scene after teleportation. Users' available working area turns green to get the users to move to a position to avoid overlapping. The teleportation can be triggered once the user physically reaches a position free of obstacles. Instead of moving the user towards the virtual object, our second technique brings the targeted virtual object to the user to recover the spatial relationship. Based on the actual position of the user's avatar in the virtual environment, the system computes the virtual object's future position in relation to its tangible prop. Different from the first technique, the resulted position is unique. In the case where this position is occupied or blocked by other virtual obstacles, the system detects the post-teleportation interference and computes a new position for the user before the teleportation. Such a new position can be computed by finding a point outside the obstacle's collider, and in some crowded virtual environments, the resulted user position computed from this basic approach can also be occupied, and in such cases, one can use a probabilistic roadmap sampling approach to compute possible configuration. The hybrid technique combines the first two techniques. It deploys a virtual representation that couples the user and the virtual object according to their spatial relationship in the real world. By manipulating such a virtual representation, the user can define the teleportation destination for the virtual object and themselves at the same time. The user can thus customize the teleportation for different virtual contexts, which can optimize the obstacle-related situations. Passive haptic is a cost-effective and straightforward solution to compensate for the lack of haptic feedback in domestic use of virtual reality. However, the required one-to-one mapping between the tangible props and their virtual counterparts hinders its use in a large-scale virtual environment. To overcome these issues, we propose three techniques to teleport the user, the object, or both of them to a new position, while preserving the user's and the object's spatial relationship. For future work, we plan to conduct user studies in various virtual scenarios using objects of different shapes and sizes to evaluate these techniques. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Iran, for the interesting presentation. And we now move to the last paper in this session, but please do keep the questions coming in the document. So our last paper of the session is titled An Interface for Enhanced Teacher Awareness of Student Actions and Attention in a VR Classroom. And the paper will be presented by David Broussard, and it's a collaboration with Toshi Raman, Arun Kulshresht, and Christoph Borst.
Hello, my name is David Broussard, and this work is about the design and evaluation of visual indicators to help teachers understand students in a VR classroom. So to start, networked VR has long been proposed as an alternative to in-person, face-to-face education. It can potentially increase student engagement and motivation. More recently, in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's been proposed as a safer alternative to in-person education. However, teacher awareness is somewhat reduced in VR, since you don't get cues like eye gaze and facial expressions you'd ordinarily get just by looking at students. Student motion can also be somewhat less constrained in VR. And in our previous study of networked VR for a remote class with Mozilla Hubs, students reported additional distractions from the VR environment, increased technical problems due to VR, and difficulty getting the teacher's attention. So we sought out to design and evaluate visual cues that would help solve some of these problems by providing the teacher with an overview of student states and compensating for some of the missing cues that are lost in VR. But we also wanted to make sure we're not showing so much information we're cluttering the teacher's view. The main piece of technology used here is a Vive iPro HMD used to estimate student attention and to track the teacher's eye gaze for use in the interface. The fundamental components of our interface are indicators, which are visual elements in the teacher's view that summarize a single student's state. But we want to avoid clutter for large classes, so we use an importance score to hide normal student states. Importance is calculated primarily based on attention level, and attention level is estimated based on eye tracking data. We intersect the student's gaze with objects in the scene, and we use these objects' relevance to influence the student's attention level. Actions are calculated based on other input like head and hand tracking, includes things like hand raising, typing, and speaking. Temperament is loosely related to student emotion and includes things like distress and frustration. Detecting temperament is an active area of research, but currently we only have visualization implemented into this system. So the simplest approach to placing indicators is to place the indicators near the students, like above their heads. But the teacher's field of attention is limited, especially in VR, so we clamp indicators to be inside the boundary of the field of attention. We collapse indicators that get too close, and these indicators become a collapsed indicator that summarizes both student states. Alternatively, we can always collapse to track the teacher's view horizontally within the field of attention at a fixed depth. We call these class-wide indicators. These are some different types of indicator collapse modes we've implemented. In particular, face icons have moving eyes that show the relative eye gaze of the student to the teacher to restore the missing cues that you don't have in VR. To redirect the teacher to potentially off-screen students, we have a number of directional indicators implemented. Different indicator elements may also sometimes appear to be tethered to a student, connecting the student with a 3D cubic curve. These appear by default in urgent cases, like when a student raises their hand, but they can appear all the time in smaller, semi-transparent forms if desired. On the avatars themselves, the eye's pupils reflect eye tracking data, and the eyes themselves change shape to reflect the openness and wideness detected for each eye, as well as the current temperament. Avatars contain a front panel graph that shows the student's recent attention and temperamental history that can be called up by hovering with eye gaze or the controller.
Hello everyone, I am Itoshi and I will be presenting the pilot study of user preferences for different cue types and their parameters. The main objective of the study was to show the interface to the subjects in order to identify reasonable parameters and get their insights about our visual techniques. We did a within-subject study. There were 11 subjects total, 8 males and 3 females, aged 23 to 38. Due to the ongoing pandemic, the subjects were convenient sample of active on-campus university personnel. Each subject began the study with randomized options and queue order. There were 12 questions where they chose between discrete options and 3 questions where they were asked to fine-tune continuous parameters. For example, on the screen, you can see a randomized initial setting where the students are represented by face icons with moving eyes in a class-wide multi-row setting. Edge highlights are used to indicate students' positions, and tethers can be seen to be connecting all students with their avatars. Subjects could then switch between different parameters of each visual cue to voice their choices to the investigator. Each subject was asked to imagine being a teacher while placed in a VR classroom with 20 simulated students. They were positioned in front of an example presentation explaining Java code containing an if-else statement, as can be seen in the right side of the screen. While going through different settings of the cue parameters, subjects explained the reason behind their preferences by responding to questions asked by the investigator, who followed a questionnaire. Subjects also gave productive comments about techniques and some representations. They used the controller to interact with the presentation and switch between visual cue settings to choose their optimal option for specific techniques. The following were our main observations from subjects' responses. Participants preferred to see all student indicators in one place and suggested we minimize the amount of information displayed to help focus on urgent students. Students should be represented by indicators displayed in a class-wide group where both indicators and tethers were shown only for important students. Face icons with moving eyes were preferred by 7 subjects as the collapsed indicators. The subject wanted to see positive student states and also suggested to combine similar states such as frustrated and distressed. Also, another suggestion was to reduce the amount of information shown. perhaps by using additional filtering or other organizational techniques. So in summary, we designed and evaluated visual cues that help the teachers understand students in a remote VR classroom. However, a key limitation of our study was that most subjects were graduate students and researchers and not actual professors or people with any other teaching experience. So in future studies, it would be interesting to see how the adjusted interface with optimized visual cues performs with real teachers simultaneously having to teach and manage students with this interface. We also want to incorporate some future work that uses improved sensing techniques for not only attention but also temperament with some physiological sensors. That concludes our presentation. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you both for the presentation. So that concludes the 5 presentations in this first session. We are now ready for the Q&A part of the workshop. We have plenty of time for questions and plenty of questions as well, as I see them popping up in the document. So I would invite all the authors and presenters of the paper to, if they are in the Zoom call, to show themselves. I will start by reading the questions, but I invite also the people who ask them to be ready in case they want to go for a quick follow-up, and anybody else in the audience that wants to chime in and ask something that they want to know. All right, so for the do we have Nico here? Yes. Okay, so I will start in the order in which we presented the paper. So there's a first question by Augusto Esteves for the paper about mixed reality in asymmetric collaborative environments, a research prototype for virtual city tours. So the question is, can you share additional insights into the design process of the prototype? Were tour guides consulted or observed?
Yeah, so hello. First, thank you for your question. So in this prototype, we just invited the tour guides on the evaluation process. So on the first, on this design we just presented, there was no inclusion of city tour guides. However, we did a preliminary study where we had a setup with mobile AR in the desk, so just the desk zone without the warp zone, and we did an expert interview with colleagues and private contacts. And based on the related work we then presented in our paper, we used these two results to then make up our design just presented. But on the next prototype, because now we have the context to the Experience City tour guides, we will do that. Yeah, you can find more information in the paper. It's linked there, the preliminary study.
Okay, thank you, Nico. And also, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to intervene. Otherwise, we'll come back at this in the next round. I'll now move to the second paper, exploring bidirectional pinpointing techniques for cross-reality collaboration. So there is a question for Priyanka. Is she there? Yes. Okay, so the question is, did you have a combined method, for example, voice and visual modality together? That would be an interesting way to combine these modalities. Did you try that?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Okay, so thank you for the questions too. We haven't done, a user study based on, just 1 second. Okay, thank you.
Now we see you. Okay, good.
Yeah, we haven't done a study that combines the techniques we have done with the empirical study set, but combining the techniques will be fine. So we are planning to consider it in our future studies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed, the techniques were evaluated independently, but that could be an interesting way for the future. Okay, we'll come back to this again in the next round. So for the third paper, we have a lot of questions. So is functionality all that matters? Examining everyday user opinion of augmented reality devices. And a question for Deviana. So by Benny Weyers. Do you plan to investigate issues with hygiene that and how they also relate to the subjective perception of this issue during the use of AR glasses?
So I didn't consider hygiene usually, but there were a few comments during the survey when sharing devices. And I hadn't considered sharing devices normally because quite often, if it's just your phone or AR glasses, you are just using them yourself. But I think especially during COVID now, when if we are sharing devices in office environments or outside, we should perhaps look at hygiene a bit more. I never asked a specific question about hygiene, but a few comments did come through about that when asked for further comments on the questions.
So participants didn't mention that they were afraid of whether the glasses were clean or not. Okay, well, that's something.
Yeah.
Okay, cool, thank you. And then for the successive paper, in touch with everyday objects, teleportation techniques in virtual environments supporting tangibility. And a question for Hiran by myself. So a few years ago, I worked on this substitutional reality concept. So I was interested in seeing how you handled some of the problems that you described in the presentation. In particular, I was interested in whether you could clarify when those techniques that you showed are applied. For example, before like the user sees the environment for the first time, or while they are in the environment, like if there's a conflict, will they see the chair moving somewhere else, or does it happen behind their back, or when exactly? Do we have Hiran here? Yes, yeah, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, okay. Yeah. So that's a great question. Honestly speaking, I didn't think about it before, but I can say here is like maybe we can detect this collision before the users enter to such an environment. So we're gonna change the position of the virtual chair before the users enter to such an environment. So this is the first edit coming up into my mind. But this is really a great question. We need to handle with that later, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a challenging aspect. Are you familiar with the change blindness concept? Yeah, where it has been explored in a few papers where such changes are applied behind the user's back, like when they look away, the position of a door might move somewhere else. I was wondering if that could be applied here as well. Okay, well, that was interesting. I was curious to see how it unfolds. And then for our last paper, there's a first question by Andrea Bons. The paper about an interface for enhanced teacher awareness of student actions and attention in a VR classroom. Question for David or Hitoshi. So the first question would be for up to how many students will the approach work without generating too much clutter?
We developed the system to work with classes. We developed the system to work with classes up to about 20 or 30 students theoretically. We brainstormed some ideas for how could we reduce the information further to support classes of larger amounts of students, but as of right now, none of those are implemented.
Okay, that was actually a multi-part question. So the second part of the question, or the second question by Andrea was, so does the teacher need to be oriented towards the students for this visual feedback, or is it also displayed when his back, or his or her back faces the students?
Yeah, the visual feedback is displayed regardless of where the teacher is facing relative to the students. it attempts to display near the students ideally, because that makes the relationship clear, but we do limit it so that if it's outside a certain range from the center of the teacher's field of view, it will kind of track the edge of the teacher's field of view to ensure that they're always able to see the cues that we've implemented.
Mm-hmm. And to follow up on that, so what would be the benefit of eye-tracked pupils? Can the teacher really interpret what the student is looking at?
Yeah, the benefit of the eye-tracked pupils, we didn't really maybe evaluate in detail as much as we could have. And in testing, I do think that it does give kind of a helpful cue that, I mean, if you see a student is kind of looking off to the side, it's reflected in both the avatar and in the icons along the teacher's interface. So I feel like it is kind of a quick visual reference, and because of how large the eyes are, it's not maybe as subtle as it would be in a real classroom. It's relatively in your face, I guess, because of how we're emphasizing the eyes on the avatars and on the icons. I think it's pretty noticeable.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, David. And also, for the people who ask questions, feel free to intervene and jump in. I think you just need to press the raise hand button if you're in the Zoom call, and somebody will, I think, unmute yourself, so that this can be more of an interactive discussion. But we'll start again the round of questions from the first paper, the mixed reality in asymmetric collaborative environments, or research prototype for virtual city tours. So again, a question for Nico from Pauline Bimberg. What motivated you to choose an asymmetric approach with the guide using an AR interface instead of immersing both parties in VR? Nico, you are muted.
No, it's working. Yeah, thanks for the question. So first and foremost, our research question. So our research question was how AR could improve the primary. So he needs to use AR. And secondly, we in our working group, we are currently working on a visual representation of our virtual city. And one of our first minds was that he needs an overview. So our first idea was a desk with a world in miniature, and to integrate the current techniques of city tours, we thought of using physical materials. Usually, if you go on a city tour, the guides usually have some pictures or floor plans they show you, and we wanted that to get into our system, and it was just there for 2 seconds, I think, in the video, with the augmented material on the desk where the small models was displayed. This was meant as these physical materials the guides are using right now. So these were the 2 main reasons we used AR in our system. However, we mentioned it in our paper. Many of the participants of the expert interview mentioned that they would like to see like a kind of a mixed virtual city tour. So some the guides and some participants are in the real city walking around, and some participants can join via VR, so that there is a dynamic virtual city tour, a mixed city tour. And this is a really interesting idea of the we got there, and we will investigate this further in the future.
And Augusto has a follow-up question on this topic. So the question is, why use AR if the tour guides, the actors, and not the activity are not in situ?
Yes, so this is quite similar. First, we had our research question, so AR was mandatory to use. And then we wanted a distributed system. So the guide can be in his office, and the visitors can be in their homes. And then we didn't think of a mixed setting, and it was and we didn't think that the guide is in the real city while the visitors are in their homes. So we just we just put the guide in the office as well.
Okay, it also looks like a COVID-safe guide. Yeah.
Yes, it was. Yeah, but it was not planned for that in the beginning.
Okay, but
yeah.
Useful benefit. All right. Okay, thank you for your answers, Nico. We'll come back to this later. And we have another question for Priyanka for the paper about exploring bidirectional pinpointing techniques for cross-reality collaboration. So the question from Tomomi Takashina, do you have some insights on why arrows are suitable over highlight and voice methods? Priyanka, you there? You need to unmute.
Okay.
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, of course, it's a 3D arrow. It's a three-dimensional arrow. It's easy for the immersed user to get the attention of a 3D arrow. And we found out in the user study, because the 3D arrow requires a low mind load, and the immersed user just to follow the arrow to identify the object notified by the external user. So we also have the, as per the user study, we also think that 3D arrow is suitable over highlighting and voice technique.
Okay, thank you for the answer. All right, then move to the paper by Dariana and about everyday user opinions of augmented reality devices, and we have a question from Augusto. The question is, there is also an interesting overlap at play between comfort and functionality. For instance, how eye makeup affects eye tracking performance. Do you consider this interplay in a broader sense?
So originally I hadn't considered the interplay. I did just ask the question separately just to see how people felt about it. For makeup, no one commented that their makeup affected the functionality at all. There weren't any comments on that. However, for hair, there were a few people who mentioned that if they changed their hairstyle, the applications no longer recognized them, and that particularly happened with people who had very curly hair. So if their hair was curly at one point or they put it back to a different hairstyle, they were actually no longer recognized by the application, which I thought was quite interesting.
Okay, I see. And on that topic, on the topic of makeup, I see there's another question by Svetlana. Maybe you want to ask it yourself.
First, I have to read. First of all, compliments to everyone so far presenting, and I'm looking forward also for the next presentations. Really nice. I enjoyed reading them. And now back to my question, because you are talking, Tiriana, about makeup and probably in general cosmetic and beauty industry, but do you think that if you change the application, somehow the results will change? And also, perhaps you already have such kind of experiments done in your lab. Could you share?
So I don't have any experiments done yet. I'm still quite new with experiments in my PhD. But what was the... Yeah, so a lot of people didn't notice too many makeup concerns. Most people actually commented that they don't wear makeup. That was an entirely other interesting finding, that not many people were actually wearing makeup that commented. So I think they were maybe about 10 people these comments were coming from out of total out of the 112. These people were in a lot of different environments. They were in like the office, at home. They were using these on different applications with the phone and the headset, but they were still commenting that it would transfer to different devices. And I guess the only way in terms of the beauty industry to stop that, you'd have to buy extra products to set your makeup so that it wouldn't transfer to the device. But that's asking users to change their lifestyle, buy more products so that they can use this already quite expensive product. I think we should avoid asking people to change how they do their daily routines just so that they can use these devices.
Good. So a lot of work to be done in beauty industry yet.
Maybe a setting spray that is designed for AR users, perhaps.
Very interesting. I don't have any experience with makeup, but it's an interesting and significant topic, for enhancing the availability and the use of these AR devices. It has to be kept in attention. All right. And another question for Yiran about a paper in touch with everyday objects, teleportation techniques in virtual environments supporting tangibility. And there's a question from Augusto. So this topic that you have presented deals with a subject discussed at length at venues such as ACM TEI, where one camp argues for generic tangible tokens that can be used across interface, because that will lead to less maintenance and waste. When another camp argues for specific tangibles for UI for better input-output mapping. And he says that there's a bit of a tension here, and he sees your work positioned in the second camp. And how do you see the first camp in the domain of VR? Also feel free to jump in if you want to clarify your question. And Yiran, we don't hear you. You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Now we can hear you.
So basically, I want to explain, like I present in my slides. Basically, our study can also apply to when one tangible object apply to multiple scenarios, and this tangible object can be reused to pair with multiple counterparts in a continuous VR experience. So I think my study can also be applied for the first camp, but as you said here, there is a compromise between how many, if you map several objects to one tangible prop, there will be a mismatch. There will be a greater mismatch between the tangible prop and the virtual objects, which can affect the user experience. So this basically a compromise between the user experience and how the tangible prop can be reused in the virtual scenarios. So there's many studies which can, maybe there's more study needed to study this kind of mismatch effects.
Thank you. I think it's just, it was a bit, it was a bit big question, but I think it's a broader design space to the one that you, oh, this is Augusto, by the way. This is the person that asked me the question. So I think it's just an interesting design space that is a bit broader than just sort of this mismatch between what the user perceives and so I think it's just something to look into when you're, I guess, developing the work. And I think there's a lot of communities, not only in VR, that are interested in this kind of interplay. But thanks for the answer. I think it was just want to sort of discuss it.
Thank you for asking.
Right, thank you, Hiran. And then another question for David or Itoshi about their paper on an interface for enhanced teacher awareness. So the question I would like to select is about privacy. I see there are a few comments on that. So there's one question by Ji Han, and what implication regarding privacy do you think this would have on students, and how would students feel to be tracked on whether they are paying attention? Sounds a bit dystopian indeed. What do you think about that? We need to unmute. Yes.
Yeah, that's something that I've personally thought about is what would students actually think if we were to implement this for real, if they knew that we were running some algorithm to determine whether or not they were doing the right thing or if they were doing the wrong thing. And I think, well, first of all, we're not designing a system that's intended to be used punitively. It's meant to be kind of an aid for the teacher, but it's not meant to be something that would then go and like deduct something from that student or somehow influence that student negatively. But I do agree that it is definitely perhaps a privacy implication. I know I probably wouldn't be too happy if, especially if all these remote classes, is something I thought about, is what if all my professors could see every time my attention drifts off, or if I get distracted and switch to like check my email really quick. Probably wouldn't be ideal, I guess. So if we are exploring this further, and that's definitely something that we'll have to consider going forward, is how we're addressing these privacy concerns while still making sure that maybe, I guess we need to make sure that we're showing enough information that the teacher's getting at least an equivalent experience to teaching in person, but not that they're getting so much information that it's becoming like a Big Brother type situation. They can see all of the students' actions at all times and know when one of them falls out of line.
And so, what was this necessity of tracking whether they're paying attention, like a requisite, or something that you thought it was interesting to add, like?
We could, aspects of the system could be done without the attention tracking. Like we could strip out the attention tracking and just leave in indicators for like if a student is raising their hand or something, or if they're typing, or if they're speaking into the microphone. And it would still, I think, it would still be useful, definitely, even without the attention scoring. The attention scoring was implemented as a means to make use of the eye tracking data from eye tracked VR headsets to provide additional data to the teacher. But you do raise a good point that it isn't actually technically critical in our interface.
And on that, Kyle Johnson made a comment. He thinks that the privacy concerns will make implementation of this exact technique impossible in an actual classroom, but he sees the system as an amazing testbed for novel pedagogy. And so, yeah, he joined his comment and saying that this is very impressive, and we all hope to see this more of this work soon. But do you have any comment to respond to that observation? Like these,
I do. And just going back to what I said earlier, that is something that we would have to address, the privacy aspect of it, if we were to actually try to implement this for real students. And it's definitely going to have to be a major focus going forwards.
All right, thank you, David. We still have about 20 minutes for questions, so we'll go back to the first paper. And I have a question for Nico. Reminding the audience, this is the paper about the virtual city tours. So my question was, if I understood correctly, the visitors, they were in VR, no? And I was wondering if they commented, or what was their reaction to when those when those visitors saw the AR. I assume they are jumping in and out of existence in a sense, like because they could move themselves from the city view to the site view. And so I think there was some kind of transition to handle that. And how was it handled, and how did they react, if they reacted to that?
Yeah, to make it short, we didn't evaluate this. So we didn't even test it. All our participants always was just on the guide wall, and the visitors were played by colleagues or myself. So we were just interested in the guides side of view in this first prototype. We did a small section in the online survey, what they would think if they would be a visitor, what's good, what's bad, and typical answers were like mimics are missing and gestures are not that clear, and they would miss that. But we didn't evaluate the visitor side in that detail that we have any answers on this one.
Okay, well, that's surely something to keep in mind for follow-up work. Okay, thank you, Nico. And then another question for Priyanka for the paper about exploring bidirectional pinpointing techniques. And the question is by Jihei Han. And the question is, which methods do you think VR users might apply to do the opposite action and catch the attention of external users? Again, you need to unmute yourself first. Yeah.
Can you
Go
hear
on?
me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you for the question too. We have done this we have done the answer to this question in our second study, where we implemented a bidirectional communication between the external user and the immersive user. So according to the second study, we found out vision cone and highlight could be the preferable techniques to catch the attention of external users, since they are using a tablet or a computer. So we can go for a vision cone and highlight techniques. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Priyanka. Okay, well, there's another question for Dariana. A question about actually from me. So you mentioned that in your work that some participant might think that when AR glasses will be as close to an actual glass as possible, then some of their concerns might go away. But I was wondering if when this moment will come, as I'm sure at some point it will be, whether there will be new problems being introduced. Like, for example, if you cannot distinguish between sunglasses and AR glasses, how do you know if they are not like looking you up on the internet and find information about you and that kind of concern? Do you think that will lead to new problems? Or did you ask this question? Or what do you think about it?
Sorry, just waiting for the unmute to pop up there. So it wasn't in the presentation, but I did ask a question on privacy to all the participants, and you can look in the paper for further comments on those. But most people weren't bothered. A lot of them said that they hadn't even thought about privacy before. It just wasn't in their minds at all. Those that had thought about privacy, I think only 3 of the headset users were concerned that the cameras were looking at their environments, and 1 participant went so far as to limit to what was in the view of the cameras to make sure that no one was able to see anything that he didn't want them to see. I think obviously once we solve one issue, another one is always going to appear. That's just the way of the world. But yeah, I think right now, just from the results of my survey, extrapolating, not many people will be concerned about this. None of the AR glassers noted any privacy concerns at all. None of them were bothered. I think there will be some people who are worried about this, but just from the percentages in my survey, most people just aren't really caring about privacy. One person did say they just felt like sacrificing privacy was what they had to do to access these devices. So while they made that comment, they weren't actually too bothered about the privacy itself. They were just like, oh, okay, that's just another thing they don't need to worry about.
Yeah, that says a lot about our current society.
Yes.
Okay, to follow up on these issues of risk, there's a question by Christina Vasileska, and the question is, were any of the AR glasses users, did they express any concerns about the possible risk of the use of AR for eyesight?
sorry, I muted myself again there. No one mentioned any concerns about AR affecting eyesight. The only concerns from the AR glasses users were from those who also wore glasses day to day, and they just really want AR glasses to combine with their normal prescription so that they don't have to keep switching between these, because it's impossible for them to wear both at once, and some people don't want to wear contacts. But no one mentioned at all that any concerns about AR affecting their eyesight. It was just, I want to be able to see, please.
Okay, thank you. There's a lot of interesting feedback on this. Okay, thank you, Dariana. Then another question for Ira about the tangible and tangibility for everyday objects. A question from Svetlana. And the question is, did you try with more than one user? What would be the results, do you think?
Yeah, if we introduce multiple users in this context, actually will complex. The problems will be more complex, depends on the context. For example, the collaboration can be categorized with the distributed or collocated. And there's also a problem when you want co-manipulate the shared object at the same time or not. So it really depends on the scenarios, which kind of scenario you want to apply this kind of techniques. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Svetlana, you want to add something?
Yes.
Or?
Yeah. I was inspired by one of the slides because I've seen some people and say, wow, cool, if you could put more people inside. And I'm aware that technically it's a challenge, and that's why I ask it. And also because then you could load on the social aspect, but obviously there is a long way to go.
Yeah.
And success with sorting all these issues.
All right, thank you.
Future, this is inspirational also for future research, I assume.
Yeah, definitely. It's one direction of this continuous of the work.
Success.
Thank you.
All right, thank you both. Okay, so we have some other questions for David and Hitoshi about their interface for enhanced teacher awareness. So there's a question echoed by both Rebecca Friedberg and Jan Hugenheimer. So the question is about whether if you also consider to give students their own feedback or attention levels. Jan also wonders what would happen if students could see the attention. So, for example, he says, can I see if my friend is paying attention or not? And he wonders about the social dynamics that could occur here, if this would lead to being more distracted or could help with attention. Where's Christoph here?
Okay, I thought I would give an
interesting background anyway. Yeah.
Well, I taught a class in hubs, and some of the visuals here are based on hubs, and I know you also taught a class in hubs. I think it's an interesting question. I think it depends on what's going on in the classroom. If you have maybe students working as a group together, or if you have a discussion type setting, it might be interesting for students to see more information about each other. But when I did a lecture type of presentation in hubs, some students reported distraction from other avatars, and I would be cautious about increasing the level of distraction by adding more indicators into the students' views. So yeah, it's an interesting question, but it depends on the context.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Yeah, indeed.
I was going to add that we do have, for testing purposes, we had implemented a basic student interface to monitor a student's own attention level. But currently the student interface wasn't actually a major focus for this current phase of the project. We devoted most of our time to developing the teacher interface, and most of the student work was mostly in regards to the sensing and sending that data to the teacher.
Okay. We have another question by Jose Garcia, and he asked whether if you had a pedagogical approach in mind for implementing this interface. If not, which pedagogical strategy do you think is better suited to your approach?
Well, I will say something, and I actually don't know if I'm going to be interpreting the question correctly, but I think what motivated the interface initially was actually a lecture style remote teaching in Mozilla Hubs. And we also in some cases had students give presentations in Mozilla Hubs. And when I was doing this, I thought about, what kind of cues am I missing? What would I like to see? Additionally, there's some other questions here about emotions and sensors, and there's someone else in my lab working on that, and we also wanted the interface to work together with this other project on sensing. So I'm not sure I've interpreted the question correctly. Initially, it was motivated by a lecture presentation
okay, so
type of environment.
Okay, because I was going more whether it was more like an active learning approach or it was going to be more experiential. But you were
yeah. I think it would be useful in both. But I think in the experiential case, maybe the teacher does not get such useful cues out of these eyes on the icons, for example. Those eyes show gaze relative to the teacher, so the teacher knows if the student is looking at the teacher. But if the students are focused on something else, maybe some of the cues work well and others do not work as well.
Yeah, so no, that's interesting because in some work we're doing, we're getting feedback from teachers that have been using Zoom and they are missing the ability to be able to grab the attention of individual students. So in that context, what you are doing is quite a contribution because it's a detected need by actual teachers. That's part of the research I'm doing now. So I was also wondering whether that already fit in a particular pedagogical approach, but yeah.
I think that David has given some thought about how to use this interface in a desktop teaching environment.
Yes, I'm currently developing an interface to allow a teacher who is not in VR to have a desktop-oriented interface to a classroom where the students themselves would be in VR. So that would be a cross-reality interface. But I guess the same system could be used for desktop students as well.
And yeah, you want to add this? Yeah, Jose.
That's good. But yeah, I mean, it's no problem if they are inside also in VR. It's more being able to have this experience that they are not getting from 2D communication tools they have to use now digitally. So that's what I think is the value of what you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have room for a few more questions, but also on this topic, we asked all other questions to other authors. So there's a few more questions left on the list. And coming back to the topic of desktop interfaces, Augusto asked whether a similar interface system could be developed for like desktop Zoom and with screen-mounted eye trackers. And also Benjamin wants to ask whether you are also considering face tracking, for example, with a new HTC face tracker for measuring the current emotional status of the student.
Yes, currently we've been, all of our research on detecting the student's emotional status has been more focused around using physiological data instead of like facial expressions. So things like heart rate and skin conductivity, instead, but using an E4 wristband that can give us that data. And that's partly because the face tracking, I think, is relatively new. So it's just not something we've had a chance to look into as much, or how effective it would be compared to getting just the raw physiological data and trying to interpret that directly. I think there's probably a chance there's some things you could detect more easily with face tracking and some things you could detect more easily with physiological data.
But sorry, David.
No, you can go.
Yeah, I just have a comment. You know, this isn't in some of these other works on detecting emotion and using physiological sensors or face tracking. You have these really dramatic environments like some kind of horror game or a VR pit or something like this. So in an educational environment, we might be dealing with some much more subtle changes.
Yeah, okay. And finally, there's two more questions from Svetlana about, for example, emotion. No? And she asked whether you have a temperature measure, or does the changing the color of the face depending on emotions?
Maybe I start just to clarify, because my two questions are related to all questions that we just discussed, and a really fantastic talk. I enjoyed very much. And two actually aspects. One, you are exploring attention with all technicalities, challenges with tracking eyes and in general the behavior, and the other is how to track emotions. So one question is about the technicalities, but the other is how to operationalize these technicalities and giving opportunity to teachers to measure emotions and the cognitive load. And by temperature, I mean, like, could you transfer the data from either the wearable devices or whatever device you are using to trace emotions, and then color the faces of your participants, like now we are doing, I'm smiling, or yes, what you did, David, now changing the color, but more or less red or smiling in this direction. And the other about the importance of students, because I had two questions. The other was coming from the second speaker, Itushi, is it the right pronunciation? Because you mentioned it, we select the most important students. How do you select these people? By emotions, by cognition, by attention?
Okay, so regarding the first question, we do have some coloration of the avatars' faces based on temperament, only for some temperaments, and it's not currently, since we don't have any of the like direct physiological sensing implemented yet, we don't have any way to directly convey like the raw data to the teacher, although that is something we have discussed. We currently do have a way that we can just map a single detected temperament to a color and then map that color to the face, so that if a student is frustrated, they might have like a red tint applied to their face, or if they're disoriented, their face might become like a greenish tint, like they're sick or something. That's currently the extent of how we alter the face color. And the important students is we map whether or not students are important based on whether or not they're paying attention, or they have some kind of temperament, or they're doing an action. And if any one of those things is the case, then they're marked as important. Otherwise, their data is hidden from the teacher.
Right, but then the question comes to pedagogical perspective. If the students are not paying attention, then does it mean the teacher is ignoring these students as in real life, or in real life the teacher, or in the virtual life the teacher also should attract more attention from the students who are not paying attention in order to bring them into the environment, two directions?
I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question. exactly.
The importance of the students, you say that the less important students, they are disabled somehow from the dashboard, whatever you call it. But from the pedagogical perspective, because this is, if you are looking for long-term perspective, would be that a teacher would like to pay attention to also to students who are not paying attention in order to bring them in the class. So back to the question whether this is purely experiential research, or you could look for further pedagogical perspective and how to implement the pedagogical point. Now I'm talking as a real teacher when I'm in the class. Should I attract more attention from students?
We need a very quick answer so that we can go to the break, or if you can, just a few words, and then perhaps you can continue on Discord or afterwards.
Afterwards, yeah.
Yeah, a quick answer, I guess, is that the way that we define important students is exactly what you mentioned, so the teacher can kind of bring them back into the fold of the class and make sure that they begin paying attention again. So that's kind of why we defined important students the way we did.
All right. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone, for attending this first session. Let's thank again all the authors and presenters for their talks and presentation and insightful answers. Okay, we will now make a short break of about 10 minutes, and then we will resume at 11:15 Lisbon time. And these are going to be the next paper in the session. So see you in a bit. Bye. together. Okay, so the first paper, as you can see from the slide, is called Fighting Alcohol Craving Using Virtual Reality, the Role of Social Interaction. And the paper will be presented by Daniel Raper, and this is a collaboration with him and Andreas Juncker, Karl Hutters, Lars Embol, Ali Jorlu, Rolf Nordahl, Stefania Serafin, Daniel Thaysen Petersen, and Anders Fink Jensen. Okay, one moment.
Hi everyone, greetings from Denmark. We're from the Multisensory Experience Laboratory at Aalborg University, Copenhagen. We would like to present our paper, Fighting Alcohol Craving Using Virtual Reality, the Role of Social Interaction. We have explored how social interaction in a virtual reality bar can affect alcohol craving. We propose a virtual environment designed in cooperation with a psychiatrist who works with individuals diagnosed with alcohol use disorder. We will present the purpose and design of this environment and how its effectiveness can be measured in future experiments when coronavirus pandemic restrictions are lifted. At first, alcoholism is experienced through higher tolerance levels, symptoms of withdrawal, and feelings of craving. Alcoholism is the world's first largest risk factor for disease and disability and has significant social and societal costs. The psychological consequences entail increases in relapse rates, resulting in more individuals diagnosed with alcohol use disorder. Additionally, individuals continue to consume alcohol despite the knowledge of its contribution to physical, psychological, and social issues. To treat alcoholism, patients must learn to cope with craving, which is considered a primary cause of relapse that often results in the onset of alcohol consumption. In this regard, cognitive behavioral therapy seeks to mitigate high-risk situations where craving is more likely to be felt. The therapy challenges cognitive distortions to change thought and behavior. High-risk situations often arise in environments where alcohol has been consumed previously. In particular, social context play a key role in inducing craving. Cue exposure treatment is another technique that has seen increased use in some practices. In a substance use disorder context, it exposes individuals to high-risk situations and craving-inducing cues. Based on the learning theory component conditioning, repeated exposure should habituate the patient and reduce or even extinguish craving in patients. Cue exposure treatment has originally been used and has seen large effect in treatments of phobia and anxiety. As such, studies have also been conducted on the efficacy in the areas of alcohol use disorder, indicating greater effect than for other substance use disorders. Methods used to induce craving in patients include visual cues, showing related images or videos to the patient, cues of imagining or recalling previous high-risk situations, as well as physical cues presenting bottles or glasses with or without alcoholic beverages. However, previous studies are seen to be inconsistent in format, the number of sessions, the type of cue stimuli, and more. As such, we see no consistent evidence for the effectiveness of cue exposure treatment for alcohol use disorder. This is why we see the potential of hand-mounted display-based virtual reality interventions. Virtual reality is seeing increased use in the healthcare sector and explored as a therapeutic tool in many different areas. Recently, virtual reality has also been exploring cue exposure treatment, where it enhances or replaces traditional techniques. Compared to these, virtual reality is highly immersive and facilitates higher feelings of presence. As such, it provides higher ecological validity when presenting cues, helping to enhance clinical ex vivo exposure to approach in vivo exposure, where craving is felt the most. Studies have identified bars as one of the environments that elicit the greatest response of craving in patients. Research also suggests that social presence for others highly induce craving in patients. However, to the best of our knowledge, the effect of social interaction on craving in virtual environments has not been explored. We built a virtual environment that replicates a real bar in Copenhagen, Denmark. Virtual patrons sit at tables in and around the bar, some of which are capable of reacting to certain user actions. For now, they're limited to react to user eye gaze and user object interaction. That could be if the user looks at certain objects or patrons, or if the user picks up a beer bottle or tilts it over. The experience in the virtual bar lasts 3 minutes, and the design of the plot focuses on presenting cues that induce craving. The plot sees the user inside the bar being greeted by a friend. The friend goes to buy them drinks, for them to return talk for a bit, and then proceed to look around for some time without talking. After a while, people in the back at the end of the bar will yell and make a toast. The friend grabs his drink, toasts with the user, and then starts to drink. During this experience, the user can trigger a reaction from the patrons at the bar in 3 stages, either before the friend enters the bar, when the user waits for the friend buying drinks, and when the friend is at the table silently looking around. Here, the friend will also react to certain user behavior. Reactions from patrons are designed to be neutral from a craving perspective. This is important to ensure that the contents of the reactions themselves do not affect craving. For a future experiment, we have planned presenting 2 conditions of the bar to participants. A condition featuring virtual patrons reacting to participant behavior, and another condition in the bar featuring no reaction from patrons. The experiment utilizes a within subject design, where every participant experiences both conditions in random order. Before and after each condition, participants are virtually placed in a neutral setting of a forest. This is to establish a craving level baseline, as well as to neutralize craving from the condition they just experienced. Finally, we plan to assess participant craving levels while inside the virtual environment. We plan to use measurements of objective physiological signals as well as subjective feelings of craving through a single item visual analog scale. We hypothesize that the condition with social interaction will generate higher craving levels due to increased believability and feelings of presence in the virtual environment, which in similar studies have been positively correlated with increased effectiveness. We also expect generally high subjective feelings of craving compared to studies using less immersive craving-inducing tools, because VR better approaches in vivo cue exposure. We expect to see VR tools support therapy sessions where feelings of craving in patients are desired by the therapist. With such tools, they should be able to more effectively process and challenge patient thoughts and behavior than by using traditional technique of cue exposure. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. We'll move on to our